Hi, and welcome back to Postscript. I'm John Petersen from the Arlington Institute, and we come to you once a month or so with speakers and guests from different places in the world who all have something to say about this extraordinary change that's going on in the world today. It's headed toward a new human and a new world. It's from movement from one era to another one. And we come to you from Berkeley Springs, here 100 miles from Washington and Baltimore, and we invite you to come and be part of this. Our Transition Talks series, you can find out more about it at transitiontalks.org. And usually sitting in this seat is one of my guests from any of a number of kind of places, but today I'm the guest. Because I'm giving the presentation this morning about some big pictures about where the world's going and how we're getting from here to there. And so I've asked my friend and fellow futurist, Gary Sycalik, to come and have a conversation with me about some of these big ideas. And so, Gary, it's very nice to have you back and be with you.
I'm pleased to be here, John.
Thank you. So we were talking about what?
We were talking about midwifing. We're talking about looking at the existing paradigm and in contrast to that, the emerging paradigm that is being born from it, and how humanity, how our society could perhaps assist this new paradigm to be born so that we could perhaps minimize the trauma that might come about with a large tectonic plate shift, so that we can do it in incremental and gradual pieces and minimize the catastrophic resultant from rapid change.
Yeah, I had a friend named Willis Harman who was used to be the president of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, the organization that astronaut Edgar Mitchell started after when he came back from being on the moon. And Willis wrote a book called Global Mind Shift. His argument was that the way you effectively deal with the kind of problems and the issues that we've got today are limited to being able to see the world through a different grid, through a paradigmatic filter, and that it was in fact a global mind shift, and probably only a global mind shift that could be the basis for this new world, this emergent new world, because what that would do would change the perspective everybody had about who they are and what was important and values and such, and therefore it would proliferate down to changing the world, not only the humans but the world. And so it seems to me that again, as we mentioned in the last segment, rather than trying to effectively engage the present situation and worry about Donald Trump and Netanyahu and any number of the other kind of people who are really playing the present game, that what we need to do is presume that there is going to be, and I think that there's good reason to argue that there's an emergent mind shift that's happening, that there's a component of people, a growing component of people who are starting to see themselves in the world in a different way, and start to build upon those new principles and those new ideas, and begin to start to structure an alternative, a vision for a new world that we can all point to and go toward.
Harman was also a good friend of mine.
Yeah,
and deep thinker.
He was a wonderful man.
A great guy. Yeah. Yes, and I would like to kind of interject one particular point relative to looking at the new, dealing with the new, and designing the new, and that is how.
Yeah.
how do we actually look at what's occurring? Through what mode of mental structures and constructs? What our eye, as we look at it, automatically makes changes.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes changes in this case, in this analogy, based on the values, attitudes, belief structures.
Right.
So we know in the past that we have had massive technological change. How have we used that technology?
Right.
It's not unreasonable to question our maturity in conjunction with the technological change. Have we matured enough to handle the significant technology and its power? And since it's changing even faster now and even becoming more powerful,
Mm-hmm.
then it seems to me that question becomes more and more pertinent. And there are ways, I believe, that we can enact that will assist humankind in looking internally at the values, the principles they operate upon, their belief structures and so forth. Because the design parameters that we create external to our thinking is reflection of what we have
Sure.
inside. Here
Of
again,
course.
the software driving the hardware.
Sure.
So this amorphous arena that exists between the software and the hardware, between humans and their belief structures and their minds and their thinking, and the technology that is actually created as a objective resultant of this software. That whole feedback mechanism that we talked about becomes more and more critical to our very survival of the species.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said earlier, the hardware is fungible. You can use it in any variety of ways, and so it comes back to the notion of mind shift in your perspective, the software part of your equation, and so what you're alluding to is the notion that you can weaponize any of these kinds of new technologies if that's your orientation.
Pretty much.
But if, on the other hand, you have this new kind of perspective, then you can use it for beneficial kind. So what you've set up now is a basic kind of dichotomy between a kind of, if you will, an old kind of or a traditional or a legacy kind of perspective that in my terms is all about separateness. It says that you're different than me, and so that sets up competition and therefore conflict and all of the other kinds of derivatives or the driving forces that derive from which all of the problems that exist on the planet now are derived are all byproducts of this notion of separateness, let's say. And the new kind of perspective that would use the technology for dramatically kind of different ways is one that's around oneness, that essentially says, as even quantum physics and Einstein and any number of other kind of folks have suggested, is this is all one big thing that we're involved in, and we are components of a larger kind of one mental or one spiritual or one creative or whatever it is. We are not separate. We are not separate, even though it appears to be that we're separate. I mean, if you get into the esoteric parts of it, what you and I both know is that there are some sources that say that when I talk to you, there is a literal kind of a physical, it's not physical in terms of anything we can see, but a connection that continues. It's almost like the neurons in your brain that are all kind of there and then connected apart, but they're all component parts of the whole. And so if you start to see things in this holistic, in this oneness kind of perspective, then I've got no reason to punch you in the nose, because what I know if not explicitly, implicitly, I know that that's going to hurt me downstream. Specifically, I know it's going to start to grate on my emotions and other kinds of stuff. I mean, it turns into kind of practical kinds of stuff. It's a, kind of an abstract kind of notion, idea, but it changes the way you look at yourself and the world, and therefore what you do with the technology and the other capabilities that come along. And so you can apply those kinds of things for wonderful new ways to make, to do food, or to communicate, or bring people together and to do communities, and any number of other things like that. And so again, I really think it comes back to this whole idea of a shift in mindset. And it's not just a shift in mindset, it's more like a holistic kind of thing about who you are and how you see the world and see yourself. And that then goes across everything else.
Yeah, not only is it a mind shift, it is a heart shift.
Yeah.
And the heart-mind connection as a concept, I think, is important as we move forward, because in the Western world, particularly from an academic standpoint, from an intellectual standpoint, we have deitized the mental ability that we have, and have put a lot of emphasis on it. But when it comes right down to it, that which makes a life worthwhile and a satisfactory one is not necessarily just mental. It is the feeling tones and the feeling reaction to what is occurring. And we have a concept called sympathetic vibratory resonance, which is the way, in my mind, the universe works. It transfers things from one to another through sympathetic vibratory resonance, oriented around a electronic or electric model.
Right.
I see that in that way. So here we are in space and time on planet Earth, where we have killed 100 million people in the last century.
Right.
We are moving in a more rapid way towards conflicts than we had in the past. We have ongoing wars constantly throughout the planet, and we have utilized technology in a way to primarily better enable us to be more efficient in killing. So we have a command control paradigm that is anchored within certain aspects of our collective society. And so as we look for that which will create change in that anchoring, perhaps we should look back into the institutional areas we previously discussed, and specifically the schools, et cetera, et cetera. How can we redesign the curriculum, for example, in our education system that brings out more balance between the mind and the heart, which re-emphasizes things like compassion, understanding, respect of sovereignty, and so forth, and away from the command control mechanism that has a tendency to create a vortex that kind of spirals down.
Yeah.
Because as this vortex spirals down and through the command control mechanism, we filter out a lot of individual ideas, creativity, and so forth.
Sure.
So as we face a new time frame in our world, we have a lot of crises that we have inherited from poor decisions of the past. In order to cope with them in the future, we need to bring these new ideas, the creativity to it, and unleash and open up and support and nurture people to be able to do that. So again, I'm back into the how can we redesign our process that will allow us to better engage our future.
Well, again, Gary, I don't think you can fix the old systems. And I think what we need to do is think about an emergent new system and how you...
I agree, but I'm not talking about fixing a new
Okay.
system. I'm talking about how we are assisting in building this new paradigm
Yeah.
that is emerging out of the death of the old one.
Well, so then now you're into the kind of the dynamics of kind of state change, and how do complex adaptive systems, if you will, vary from one state, do a state change from one state to another one, and the process, as I understand it, and what certainly you can see around us, is that bubbling up in different kind of places are alternatives to the status quo, to the organized command control kind of structural approach that are really antithetical, and that and Rudolf Steiner comes to mind, and his school systems and some of the other kind of things, his Waldorf schools, to where you teach young people how to think and how to and values and such, and adaptability, and some of these basic kind of capabilities to be able to deal with this new world. I often, when I give talks different places, people come to me or raise questions, and the questions and answers, and say, what should I study? What should I tell my grandson, or what should they study? Well, when you look into, from my point of view, when you look into this emergent new world, there are so many moving parts, and they're so interconnected, that what you really want to do is suggest to somebody that they need to be generalists, and they need to be broadly knowledgeable, but more than that, they have to have these basic core capabilities to be able to have logic and coupled with intuition, with the ability to reasonable assessment. I mean, there's some structural kind of thinking and an analytical kind of capabilities that allow you the adaptability to be able to deal with whatever is happening, because it's all happening in a hurry, and a lot of it is kind of strange. And so that's I really think that, again, I'm sorry, rather than try to change or do curricula different or something, is that there's a radical, when you go through this transition from one era to another one, the resulting era is dramatically different than the past one. And so what I think is that there is just a dramatic new way in which to kids to learn that is not clear in my mind yet.
Well, yes, I don't think any particular path is very clear at this point. One of the things Buckminster Fuller said was that one of our great problems is we have too many specialists.
Yeah.
We do not have an understanding that the generalist mindset had. With respect to things that are in the category of education and curriculum and so forth, I'm not necessarily an advocate of saying we redesign the curriculum saying this is the way it is, this is how you need to think, and so forth. Again, it has to do with process, by saying what is important in life are these kinds of things. And you go into values and principles. Right. And so these are the ingredients that enter into the process that will actually co-create that which is emerging.
Yeah, yeah.
So these things you're talking about that are emerging and bubbling up, they're antithetical to existing structure, spontaneously comes from this unknown source of the collective consciousness that is constantly attempting to bring forth balance and harmony in sympathetic vibratory resonance principle. And so as we see these, we say, how can we help facilitate them? Not necessarily one thing, but the process of bringing it forth. How can we reorient our academic structure so that it recognizes instead of stifles these things? How can we help nurture creativity that will constantly keep birthing this new?
Well,
in a better way.
Let me talk to that a bit. I've got a crazy and wild idea I've been carrying around for a long time.
I'll bet you have.
Yeah, that says that all of the rules and laws and everything are all based upon this notion of separateness and the presumed values that people have right now. And that my guess is that there are half a dozen kind of basic kind of principles for living within this new kind of context that you're talking about. Things like, you can do anything you want as long as you don't hurt anybody else, or treat other people like you'd like to be treated yourself, the golden rule. I mean, there's some, I don't know what they are, but I'll bet you that there's about 6 of these basic kind of things that if you taught children from the beginning that these are the fundamental ways in which you live, then someone, a young person, and ultimately an adult, would be in a position to be able to make an intelligent and effective decision no matter what the situation was. You wouldn't need any rules, you wouldn't need any laws, or certainly not the piles of laws and everything, because you'd know, how do you treat somebody else in this kind of situation relative to me? And it's, again, this holistic oneness kind of notion that says that this is not me against you, but we're all working to make this thing all work together. And so I am intrigued with the notion that you could, and by the way, what that gives you is flexibility and adaptability to be able to deal with anything that emerges. And so you don't have to kind of be an expert on something. And by the way, then you have to couple this thing with access to intuition so that you can bring the decision making and at the moment the stuff and that's really different than trying to.
It is. I agree with you 100%. This is giving the children the raw materials to be able to deal with the moment as it emerges, not based on precedent, which is a function of law, but is based on what's happening in the dynamic now. Because there is no other now like it ever before, and there's not going to be again. So it has a unique configuration. And so the best thing that one can do is to actually be aware of what is happening there and understand the kinds of things you're talking about that give these people the raw materials to be able to come forth with decisions, with perceptions that are a benefit for all concerned. It's not based on command and control. It's based on respect of sovereignty, respect for the human being, respect for life.
Yeah.
All things on the planet, not just humans, but all life on the planet.
And there's an interesting thing there's a really nice confirmation that those kinds of things that we're moving in that kind of direction when you think of universal basic income, for instance. The manufacturing and the approach in robotics and other kind of things we're doing are projected to eliminate 80% of the jobs that exist right now by 2040. And what that means is that you just can't get there from here in any kind of conventional kind of terms. You have to redesign the whole system. Mm-hmm. You have to redesign that. You have to reconstitute and define who human beings are, because they can't just be economic contributors, because there isn't enough economic bandwidth in order to make them do that. And so what they're talking about is to have a base to everybody supported, to a basic income of $25,000 or something like that, so that everybody, and what that then allows is people to operate in a different kind of space relative to the larger reality, because they're no longer tied in quite the same way to the economic system.
Yeah, and they are adapting. And here again, it comes back to the importance of being able to adapt.
Yeah.
It's critical.
Yeah.
It is absolutely critical. I can think of two corporations that had to take extraordinary measures to deal with paradigmitis. One was General Electric, and this came about as they were moving from tubes to transistors in the electronics arena. They had to build a new building and hire new engineers just specifically for the transistors, because the old engineers that were tube-oriented could not adapt. Their paradigm was too fixed. And the other one was Kodak.
Yeah.
So I had the opportunity to do a 3-day event on planning for Kodak somewhere around 1995 or 96.
And you clearly weren't successful.
They didn't listen. They didn't listen.
Right, I know.
And this was a game event that involved their senior officials.
I know.
About 100 people.
We got about 30 seconds here, but I mean, it's that there are all these examples of folks who don't stand up and adapt to the new, and that's the essential kind of message out of all of this, I guess, is that you got to stand up and become somebody different. You have to redefine who you are, and the opportunities are really pretty extraordinary.
And our species depends on that adaptation.
Gary Sycalik, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, John.
And thanks for being on Postscript. And thank you for being with us as well. We come to you every month or so with a different kind of provocative guest to talk about the big change that's going on in the world, and we hope you'll come back. You can find out about who's going to be with us here in Berkeley Springs at transitiontalks.org, and come back and visit us on Postscript. I'm John Petersen from the Arlington Institute. Thank you.